From accidental haunting to tragic death, some of the most talented actors have enjoyed their success that followed, but some have suffered for their art. In this 5-part miniseries, we'll be looking into some of the most infamous curses that have left an everlasting shadow over Hollywood. Warning: this episode contains images that some may find disturbing. The 1980s are synonymous with horror, but one 80s series of films in particular carries the most infamous reputation. In 1982, writer and producer Steven Spielberg and director Tobe Hooper formed a dream team to bring us the classic supernatural shocker Poltergeist. Originally, Spielberg intended to direct the film himself, but as he was also making E.T. Extraterrestrial for the same year, his contract prevented him from directing any other film of the same time. Tobe Hooper was selected following his huge success with another cult classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 8 years earlier. He'd also directed the vampire miniseries Salem's Lot in 1979. Spielberg also intended on this production being a dark sequel to the 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Tobe Hooper, however, suggested a ghost story instead of a sci-fi film. Poltergeist is the story of a suburban family haunted by evil spirits who manage to abduct their youngest daughter, Caroline, holding her in the fourth dimension. The family desperately try to bring Caroline back with the help of clairvoyant Tangina. Playing the terrorized parents were Craig T. Nelson and JoBeth Williams, whom appeared together only 2 years earlier in the 1980s Pryor and Wilder double act Stir Crazy. In the role of Caroline was 6-year-old Heather O'Rourke, making her film debut delivering the iconic line, "They're here." The only cast member to appear with Heather in all 3 films was Zelda Rubinstein, as a 4'3", soft-spoken but fierce clairvoyant Tangina. Although Heather went on to be the most infamous victim of the curse, she was not the first. Playing Caroline's older sister Dana was Dominique Dunne, sister to Griffin Dunne, one of the stars of the previous year's An American Werewolf in London. Dominique met John Thomas Sweeney at a party in 1981. Before long, the couple moved into a 1-bedroom house in West Hollywood. Sweeney was a jealous and possessive man, and the relationship quickly turned sour. Dominique became a victim of domestic abuse, and Sweeney went as far as pulling out her hair and banging on the doors and windows of her mother's house after she fled there. When Dominique moved back in with Sweeney, they fought again on September 26, 1982. Dominique was grabbed by the throat, thrown to the floor, and strangled. Luckily, a friend staying at the house interrupted the attack, leading Dominique to sneak out of the bathroom window. Sweeney jumped on her car before she drove away. She ended the relationship and had the locks changed. But barely a month later, the night before Halloween, Dominique was rehearsing with fellow actor David Packer at her home when Sweeney arrived at the door. As the two argued on the porch, Packer heard a scuffle and called the police, who claimed the house was out of their jurisdiction. Packer then called a friend and told him that if he was found dead, John Sweeney was the killer. Packer went out through the back door and walked round to the front of the house, where he found Sweeney kneeling over Dominique in some bushes. He ordered Packer to call the police. When they arrived, Sweeney had his hands in the air and admitted to killing Dominique and attempting to take his own life. Dominique had been strangled. She was placed on life support as her heart had stopped, but never regained consciousness. After several brain scans, she showed no signs of brain activity due to oxygen deprivation. She was taken off life support 5 days later and pronounced dead on November 4th, 19 days before her 23rd birthday. Sweeney was charged with attempted murder, but after Dominique had passed away, the charge was changed to first-degree murder, to which he pleaded not guilty. His trial began in August the following year, where he was also charged with assault and intent to do great bodily harm. He claimed that he had no intention of harming Dominique when he arrived, but lashed out when she allegedly led him on. He claimed he had no memory of the attack until he found his hands around her throat, tried to resuscitate her, and ran into the house to consume 2 bottles of pills before returning to her body, where David Packer found him. The autopsy showed Dominique had been strangled for 3 minutes, causing Sweeney's heat of passion defense to be dismissed, as prosecutors believed this was enough time to regain control of his actions. An ex-girlfriend of Sweeney's testified she was also physically abused and hospitalized twice with injuries like a perforated eardrum, broken nose, and a collapsed lung. During her testimony, Sweeney leapt from his seat and ran for the judge's chambers before being restrained. The defense had this entire testimony ruled as inadmissible as it was prejudicial. The jury were not even aware of Lillian Pierce's testimony until after the trial. If that wasn't bad enough, Judge Katz also refused to allow Dominique's mother and friends to testify, as their statements were hearsay. The charge of first-degree murder was dropped without proof of premeditation, and the jury were instructed to only consider manslaughter and second-degree murder. John Thomas Sweeney was acquitted of the murder charge and found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 6 years and served just 3 years and 7 months before being released on parole. Poltergeist was released just 5 months before Dominique's death and at the time earned a whopping $76 million. The film was initially given an R rating. Following an appeal by Spielberg and Hooper, it was changed to PG. The PG-13 rating came into effect 2 years later. Due to E.T. and Poltergeist being released only a week apart, many questioned how involved Spielberg was as a producer, and neither were involved in the 1986 sequel, Poltergeist 2: The Other Side. Carol Ann was again targeted by spirits led by the Beast, this time in the form of the ghost of 19th century cult leader Reverend Henry Kane, played by Julian Beck. His performance became one of the most memorable parts of the sequel, even scaring Heather O'Rourke to tears the first time she saw him. But there was a reason behind Beck's unforgettable appearance. 2 years earlier, he'd been diagnosed with stomach cancer. The seasoned theatre actor barely finished the film as he passed away in November 1985 at the age of 60. Some of his lines were re-recorded with a voice double before the film was released 6 months later. Another death connected to the second film was that of Will Sampson, who played the good ghost of Shaman Taylor. Sampson performed an actual exorcism on set after the discovery that actual skeletons were being used as props. Sampson suffered from a degenerative condition which affected his heart, lungs, and skin. He died of kidney failure just over a year after the second film's release. Finally, in 1988, Carol Ann faced off against Reverend Kane again in the third film in the trilogy, Poltergeist 3. For this film, she's staying with her aunt and uncle, played by Nancy Allen and Tom Skerritt. Carol Ann's cousin Donna is also played by Lara Flynn Boyle, making her official film debut. During production, Zelda Rubinstein was informed of her mother's death. In a spooky little known fact, when director Gary Sherman was reviewing footage, he found one take was unusable as a white blot was covering Zelda's face. When Zelda checked the time of the footage, she found it was the same time her mother had passed away. Zelda herself passed away in 2010 at the age of 76, several months after suffering a heart attack. With pre-existing conditions, she never fully recovered. A year before Poltergeist 3 went into production, young Heather had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease. In order to fight the disease, she was prescribed cortisone injections during production, causing noticeable facial swelling. On February 1st, 1988, Heather collapsed in her home and was rushed to hospital. She went into cardiac arrest in the ambulance where paramedics were able to restart her heart. Doctors discovered part of her intestine had swelled to 4 inches in diameter and operated on her for acute bowel obstruction. 2 hours into the operation, Heather was pronounced dead as a result of congenital stenosis and septic shock. She was just 12 years old. With just 4 months left until the third film was scheduled to be released, Gary Sherman was pressured to complete the film and reshot an altered ending the following month. The film was released in June, still cast in the shadow of its young star's sudden death, and was mostly panned. Due to increasing concerns of the alleged curse and the reception of the third film, a fourth installment was promptly cancelled. However, a remake was produced in 2015, starring Sam Rockwell and Jared Harris, with Kennedy Clements as Madison, serving the precious role of Carol Ann. In a spooky coincidence, Kennedy appeared in the 2009 TV series V, a reboot of the 1983 series which was set to star Dominique Dunne, the show she was rehearsing for at the time of her murder. The Poltergeist remake failed to match the success of the original, but managed a fair profit at the box office. So far, the film itself seems to be the only victim of the alleged curse. Next time on Hollywood Curses, in the final episode of the series, it's a triple bill, as the devil himself was the subject of The Omen, The Exorcist, and Rosemary's Baby.